Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had seen many difficult days during his 3 tours in Afghanistan, but nothing prepared him for the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March when his commanding officer delivered the news that would shake him to his core. His best friend and fellow soldier, Private First Class Danny Martinez, had been killed in action during a routine patrol outside Kandahar. Danny and Michael had grown up in the same neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. They joined the Army together right after high school, dreaming of serving their country and making their families proud. Danny was the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, even in the darkest moments. He had a way of finding hope when everything seemed hopeless. The 2 men had promised each other's families that they would look out for one another no matter what happened. The explosion that took Danny's life came without warning. Their convoy was returning to base after delivering supplies to a remote outpost when the improvised explosive device detonated. Michael was in the vehicle behind Danny's truck and watched helplessly as his best friend's world disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. Despite the medics' best efforts, Danny died from his injuries before they could get him to the field hospital. Now, 3 days later, Michael found himself preparing for the most important mission of his military career. He had volunteered to be Danny's escort, the soldier responsible for accompanying his friend's remains back to American soil. It was both an honor and a heartbreaking duty that he knew he had to fulfill. Danny's mother had specifically requested that Michael be the one to bring her son home, and there was no way he would let her down. The process of preparing fallen soldiers for their final journey home is something most people never see or understand. Michael spent hours making sure every detail was perfect. Danny's uniform had to be pressed to perfection, his ribbons and medals arranged exactly as regulations required. The flag that would drape his casket was folded with military precision, each crease representing the respect and honor due to a fallen hero. Michael's own emotions were a whirlwind of grief, anger, and determination. He barely slept the night before their departure, thinking about all the conversations he and Danny would never have, all the plans they had made for after their deployment that would never come to pass. Danny had been planning to propose to his girlfriend Sarah when he got home. The engagement ring was still in his personal effects, a painful reminder of dreams cut short. The morning of departure arrived with typical military efficiency. Michael dressed in his Class A uniform, making sure every button was polished and every ribbon was straight. This wasn't just any flight, this was Danny's final journey home, and Michael was determined that everything would be done with the utmost respect and dignity. He had been through the escort training, knew all the protocols, and understood the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. At the airfield, Michael watched as Danny's flag-draped casket was loaded onto the military transport, playing with the ceremonial care it deserved. Every movement was deliberate and respectful. The other soldiers on the loading crew understood the solemnity of the moment, working in reverent silence as they secured the casket for its journey across the ocean. The flight from Afghanistan to Germany was the first leg of their journey home. Michael sat in the cargo area near Danny's casket, maintaining his vigil even at 30,000 feet. He thought about Danny's family waiting back in Phoenix, how his mother had cried when she received the news, how his father had stood silently in the background, too proud and too broken to show his emotions. Danny's younger sister Maria had just started college and idolized her big brother. Breaking the news to her had been one of the hardest things Michael had ever witnessed. During the layover in Germany, Michael never left Danny's side. Military. Protocol required that the escort remain with the fallen soldier at all times during transport, but for Michael, it was more than just following orders. It was a promise he had made to his friend and to Danny's family. No matter what happened, Danny would not make this journey alone. The second flight would take them to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where Danny would go through the dignified transfer process before continuing on to Phoenix for burial. Michael had attended several of these ceremonies during his military service, and he knew how important they were for the families of fallen soldiers. It was often their first chance to say goodbye and begin the difficult process of grieving their loss. As they prepared to board the commercial airline for the final leg of their journey to Phoenix, Michael felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They were almost home, almost to the end of this sacred duty. He had successfully brought his best friend across 2 continents and an ocean, maintaining the honor and dignity that Danny deserved every step of the way. The airline staff at Dover seemed professional and understanding when Michael explained his mission. They assured him that everything would be handled with appropriate care and respect. The gate agent even thanked him for his service and expressed condolences for his loss. Michael felt grateful for their understanding and support during such a difficult time. He had no idea that in just a few hours, this same airline would put him in an impossible position, forcing him to make a choice between his duty to his fallen friend and his need to get home. The decision they would ask him to make would go against everything he believed in as a soldier and as a friend. The consequences of their actions would soon become a national story, showing the world what happens when corporate policies clash with military honor and human decency. As Michael settled into his seat for what should have been a routine flight home, he had no way of knowing that the next few hours would test his resolve in ways that combat never had, and that his unwavering loyalty to Danny would soon make headlines across the country. The problems began before Michael even boarded the plane. As he approached the gate at Dover Air Force Base for his connecting flight to Phoenix, he noticed unusual activity around the departure area. Several airline employees were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones and occasionally glancing in his direction. Something was clearly wrong, but Michael couldn't imagine what could possibly be the issue. Danny's casket had been loaded into the cargo hold with the same military precision and respect that had characterized every step of their journey so far. Michael had personally supervised the loading process, ensuring that his friend was treated with the dignity befitting a fallen hero. The ground crew had been professional and respectful, understanding the sacred nature of their cargo. When boarding began, Michael presented his ticket and military identification to the gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor that seemed forced. She studied his documents for longer than necessary, then called over a supervisor. The supervisor, a stern-looking man in his 50s, examined Michael's paperwork with obvious skepticism. "Is there a problem?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice calm and professional, despite the growing knot in his stomach. He had been traveling for over 24 hours and was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The last thing he needed was a bureaucratic delay when he was so close to completing his mission. The supervisor exchanged glances with the gate agent before speaking. "We need to discuss the cargo situation with you, Sergeant. There seems to be some confusion about the documentation for the casket in our cargo hold." His tone was businesslike, showing no acknowledgement of the sensitivity of the situation. Michael felt his jaw tighten. "There's no confusion. Private First Class Martinez is being transported home for burial. I am his military escort, and all documentation is in order. This has been coordinated through proper military channels." The supervisor nodded curtly. "We understand that, but we've discovered that our cargo space is at capacity. We're going to need to make some adjustments to accommodate all the luggage and cargo for this flight." He paused, seeming uncomfortable with what he was about to say next. The words that followed hit Michael like a physical blow. "We're going to need to put the casket on the next available flight. You can continue on this flight, and the remains will follow on the next one tomorrow morning. We'll ensure everything is handled properly." Michael stared at the man in disbelief. "Absolutely not. I don't leave his side. That's not how this works. He doesn't travel alone." His voice remained steady, but there was an edge of steel that anyone who had served with him would recognize. This was not a man who would be easily moved from his position. The supervisor's expression hardened. "Sir, we have other passengers and cargo to consider. The casket takes up significant space and we have weight restrictions. This is a practical solution that accommodates everyone's needs. He spoke as if he were discussing a piece of furniture, rather than the remains of an American soldier who had died serving his country. "You don't understand," Michael said, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to remain calm. "I took an oath to escort him home. I promised his mother I would bring him back safely. I don't abandon that responsibility because of your cargo space issues." The very idea of leaving Danny alone in a cargo hold overnight was unthinkable to him. The gate agent tried to interject with what she clearly thought was a reasonable compromise. "We can assure you that the casket will be given priority loading on tomorrow's flight. Our cargo handlers are trained professionals, and nothing will happen to it overnight in our secure facility." Michael turned to her with a look that made her step back slightly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't load a fallen soldier like cargo. He's not a package. He's a hero who died defending this country, and I'm not leaving him in some warehouse overnight because you didn't plan your cargo properly." Other passengers had begun to notice the commotion at the gate. Some moved closer, trying to understand what was happening. A few seemed annoyed by the delay, checking their watches and muttering complaints. Others appeared more sympathetic, especially when they overheard fragments of the conversation about a fallen soldier and a military escort. The supervisor looked around nervously, clearly aware that the situation was beginning to attract unwanted attention. "Look, Sergeant, we're trying to work with you here, but we have policies and regulations that we have to follow. The flight is overbooked for cargo, and we need to make adjustments." "Then make them somewhere else," Michael replied firmly. "Bump someone else's luggage if you have to, but Private Martinez is not getting left behind. I'll sleep in that cargo hold with him before I let him travel alone." His determination was absolute, and it showed in every line of his body. The supervisor seemed taken aback by Michael's intensity. "That's not possible, sir. Passengers cannot travel in the cargo hold under any circumstances. It's a safety violation." He was clearly struggling to maintain his authority in the face of Michael's unwavering resolve. "Then find another solution," Michael said. "Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not getting on that plane without him. We travel together, or we don't travel at all." The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. A small crowd had gathered now, including several other military personnel who were traveling through Dover. When they heard what was happening, their expressions grew increasingly serious. Word began to spread through the waiting area about the airline's demand that a military escort abandon his fallen comrade. One of the listening soldiers, a Navy commander, approached the gate. "Excuse me," he said to the supervisor, "but are you seriously asking this soldier to abandon his escort duty?" His voice carried the authority of years of military service and multiple combat deployments. The supervisor looked increasingly uncomfortable as more eyes turned toward him. "We're just trying to solve a logistical problem," he said defensively. "We have limited cargo space and weight restrictions that we have to follow." The Navy commander shook his head in disgust. "That's not a logistical problem. That's a failure. To honor our fallen heroes. This soldier has a sacred duty, and you're asking him to violate it for your convenience." His words carried through the gate area, and more passengers stopped to listen. Michael felt grateful for the support, but he also knew that this confrontation was escalating beyond what anyone had anticipated. The airline personnel were clearly unprepared for this situation, and their corporate policies had not accounted for the realities of military escort duty. But he also knew that he would not compromise on his responsibility to Danny, no matter what pressure they applied. The situation at the gate continued to deteriorate as more airline personnel arrived to handle what they clearly viewed as a difficult passenger situation. Michael watched with growing frustration as supervisors and managers huddled together, discussing him as if he weren't standing right there. Their whispered conversations and occasional glances in his direction made it clear that they saw him as the problem, not their policy that would separate a fallen soldier from his escort. A woman in a business suit approached, introducing herself as the station manager. Her tone was polite but firm, the kind of voice used to dealing with upset passengers who didn't want to accept company policies. "Sergeant Torres, I understand your concerns, but we have to follow federal aviation regulations. The cargo weight limits are not something we can simply ignore." Michael had been patient up to this point, but something in her tone pushed him over the edge. "Federal regulations?" he said, his voice carrying the controlled anger of a soldier who had reached his limit. "Federal regulations require me to escort fallen soldiers. Federal regulations say I don't abandon my post. Which federal regulations are more important to you?" The station manager blinked, clearly not expecting such, a direct challenge to her authority. "Sir, please understand that we're not trying to be disrespectful. We're simply dealing with practical limitations. The aircraft has weight restrictions that affect safety." "Then explain to me how every other airline manages to transport fallen soldiers with their escorts," Michael replied. "This isn't some new situation you've never encountered before. Military escorts fly with fallen soldiers every single day in this country. What makes your airline so special that you can't figure out how to do what everyone else does routinely?" The growing crowd of onlookers was becoming increasingly vocal in their support for Michael. Several passengers had pulled out their phones and were recording the confrontation. A retired veteran in the crowd called out, "This is disgraceful. That soldier died for this country." Others murmured agreement, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval directed at the airline staff. The station manager looked around nervously, clearly realizing that this situation was spiraling beyond her control. The last thing any airline wanted was negative publicity involving fallen soldiers and military escorts. But she also seemed unwilling to back down from the company's position. "Perhaps we can work out a compromise," she suggested. "We could upgrade you to first class on tomorrow's flight, and we'll ensure that the casket receives priority handling. You'd both travel in comfort, and there would be no cargo issues." Michael stared at her in disbelief. "A compromise? Lady, there is no compromise when it comes to escorting fallen soldiers. I don't leave him, period. I don't care if you want to put me in the pilot's seat. I'm not leaving Private Martinez alone in your cargo hold overnight." An elderly man in the crowd, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, pushed forward. "Son," he said to Michael, "you stick to your guns. Don't let these people bully you into abandoning your duty." He turned to the station manager with fire in his eyes. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. This young man is trying to honor his fallen comrade, and you're treating it like it's an inconvenience." The station manager's face flushed red. "Sir, we're not trying to dishonor anyone. We're simply dealing with operational constraints that require difficult decisions." Her composure was beginning to crack under the pressure of public scrutiny. "Operational constraints?" the veteran shot back. "During the war, we called that cowardice. You make it work because it's the right thing to do, not because it's convenient." More passengers joined the growing confrontation, their voices rising in support of Michael and criticism of the airline. Someone had already posted a video to social media, and comments were pouring in from around the country. The hashtag, "I honor our fallen," was beginning to trend as people shared their outrage over the airline's treatment of a military escort. The station manager realized she was facing a public relations nightmare. She pulled out her phone and stepped, a way to make a call, presumably to higher-level management who could make decisions beyond her authority. Michael could see her gesturing frantically as she tried to explain the situation to whoever was on the other end of the line. Meanwhile, Michael stood his ground, his resolve never wavering despite the chaos swirling around him. This wasn't about making a scene or causing problems for the airline. This was about honoring his friend and fulfilling the most important duty of his military career. Danny's family was waiting for them in Phoenix, and he had promised to bring their son home safely. A young soldier in the crowd approached Michael during the lull in confrontations. "Sergeant, I want you to know that every service member here supports what you're doing. Don't let them pressure you into compromising your duty." The soldier's words were echoed by nods and murmurs of agreement from other military personnel in the area. Michael felt strengthened by their support, but he also felt the weight of representing something larger than himself. This wasn't just about him and Danny anymore. It was about how America treats its fallen heroes and the soldiers who serve with honor. Every eye in that terminal was watching to see whether corporate policies would override military duty and basic human decency. The station manager returned from her phone call, her expression grim. It was clear that the conversation with her superiors had not gone the way she had hoped. She approached Michael with obvious reluctance, knowing that whatever she was about to say would not resolve the situation to anyone's satisfaction. "Sergeant Torres," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "I've spoken with our corporate office, and they've confirmed that we cannot make exceptions to our cargo weight restrictions. The safety of all passengers must take priority." She paused, clearly steeling herself for what came next. "However, we're prepared to offer you compensation for the inconvenience and guarantee priority booking on tomorrow's first flight." The crowd erupted in angry voices before Michael could even respond. "Compensation?" someone shouted. "You can't put a price on honor." Another voice called out, "This is America! We don't leave our soldiers behind!" Michael held up his hand, quieting the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried a finality that everyone in the terminal could hear. "Ma'am, I want to make something very clear to you and to your corporate office. I am not leaving this airport without Private Martinez. We will wait here for as long as it takes for you to find a solution that keeps us together. If that means we miss this flight and the next one and the one after that, so be it. But we travel together or we don't travel at all." Word of the confrontation had spread far beyond the Dover Air Force Base terminal. Social media was exploding with outrage as videos of the incident went viral. News outlets were picking up the story, and reporters were already calling the airline's corporate headquarters demanding explanations. The hashtag, or Honor Our Fallen, was trending nationally, with thousands of Americans expressing their anger over the airline's treatment of Michael and Danny. The station manager was fielding phone calls, constantly now, her stress evident as she tried to manage a situation that had escalated far beyond anyone's expectations. Corporate executives were undoubtedly watching their company's reputation crumble in real time as negative publicity mounted by the hour. Michael remained steadfast in his position, though the emotional toll was becoming increasingly evident. He had been traveling for over 30 hours, dealing with the grief of losing his best friend while maintaining the composure required for his escort duties. Now he faced the additional stress of fighting for the right to fulfill his most sacred responsibility. A group of Gold Star families, those who had lost children in military service, had somehow learned about the situation and arrived at the terminal to show their support. These parents, who understood better than anyone the importance of honoring fallen soldiers, stood with Michael in silent solidarity. Their presence added another layer of gravity to an already emotional situation. Sarah Martinez, Danny's girlfriend, had been following the news coverage from Phoenix. She called Michael's phone, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Michael, I can't believe this is happening. Danny should be coming home with honor, not becoming the center of some corporate controversy. His parents are devastated that their son is being treated like cargo." Michael stepped away from the crowd to take the call privately. "Sarah, I promise you I'm not backing down. Danny and I are coming home together, just like we planned. These people can keep us here for a week if they want, but I'm not leaving him behind." His voice was strong, but she could hear the exhaustion underneath. "I know you won't," Sarah replied through her tears. "Danny always said you were the most loyal person he knew. He would do the same thing for you." The weight of her words hit Michael hard, reminding him once again of the bond he had shared with his fallen friend. Meanwhile, the airline was facing mounting pressure from multiple directions. Members of Congress had begun issuing statements, condemning the company's treatment of military personnel. Veterans organizations were calling for boycotts. The Department of Defense was demanding explanations. What had started as a routine cargo management decision was becoming a national scandal. The airline's stock price was beginning to drop as investors recognized the potential long-term damage to the company's reputation. Social media was filled with stories from other military families who had faced similar treatment from various airlines, suggesting this was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of disrespect toward fallen soldiers and their escorts. A new executive arrived at the terminal, clearly someone with more authority than the local station manager. He looked harried and stressed, carrying himself with the urgent energy of someone sent to put out a fire that was threatening to burn down the entire company. His expensive suit and confident demeanor marked him as corporate management, likely flown in specifically to handle this crisis. He approached Michael with a forced smile, extending his hand in what was obviously a calculated gesture. "Sergeant Torres, I'm David Richardson, Vice President of Operations for the airline. I want to personally apologize for this situation and work with you to find a resolution." Michael shook his hand, but remained guarded. He had seen enough corporate damage control to recognize the approach. "Mr. Richardson, the resolution is simple. Private Martinez and I travel together on the next available flight. That's not negotiable." Richardson nodded eagerly, his media training evident in his carefully measured response. "Absolutely, and we want to make that happen. We've been working with our operations team to find creative solutions to the cargo weight issue. We believe we can accommodate both you and Private Martinez on the next flight." "What about this flight?" Michael asked pointedly. "The one that's sitting at the gate right now, the one we were supposed to be on?" He wasn't going to let them off the hook easily, especially after hours of being told their policies couldn't be changed. Richardson's smile flickered slightly. "Unfortunately, that flight has already completed its loading process, and safety regulations prevent us from making changes at this point. But I can guarantee you priority boarding on the next flight, along with our sincere apologies for this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" The word came out sharper than Michael intended. "Mr. Richardson, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Your staff told me to abandon my escort duty. They wanted me to leave a fallen soldier in your warehouse overnight, because it was more convenient for your cargo operations. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a failure to understand what military service means." The crowd, which had been listening intently to every word, erupted in renewed support for Michael. "Tell him, Sergeant!" someone called out. Others applauded, their support echoing through the terminal. Richardson looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of this conversation. "Perhaps we could discuss this more privately," Richardson suggested, gesturing toward a nearby conference room. "I think we can work out all the details and get you both home where you belong." Michael considered the offer for a moment, then shook his head. "No, sir. We've been having this conversation in public because your staff made it public when they put me in this position. If you want to solve this problem, you can solve it right here, where everyone can hear your commitment." Richardson realized he had no choice but to continue the conversation in full view of the cameras and witnesses. His company's reputation was hanging by a thread, and every word he spoke would be scrutinized by millions of Americans who were watching this story unfold. "Very well," Richardson said, his voice carrying the weight of someone making a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. "Sergeant Torres, I want to personally guarantee that you and Private Martinez will travel together on our next available flight to Phoenix. We will remove cargo if necessary to accommodate your needs, and we will cover any additional costs associated with rebooking other passengers or freight." The crowd listened intently as Richardson continued. "Furthermore, I want to apologize on behalf of our entire company for the way this situation was handled. Our staff should have immediately recognized the sacred nature of your duty and worked to accommodate your needs rather than asking you to compromise your responsibilities." Michael studied the executive's face, looking for signs of sincerity behind the corporate speak. And what happens to the employees who created this situation? What assurance do I have that other military escorts won't face the same treatment? Richardson shifted uncomfortably. We will be conducting a full review of our policies regarding military escorts and fallen soldiers. We will also be providing additional training to our staff to ensure they understand the importance of these missions and the respect they deserve. The answer was vague and non-committal, the kind of corporate response designed to sound serious, without making specific promises. Michael recognized it for what it was, but he also knew that pushing further might jeopardize the progress they had made toward getting Danny home. The airline's promises proved to be more substantial than expected. Within hours, Richardson's team had completely reorganized the cargo manifest for the next flight to Phoenix. Commercial freight was removed, passenger luggage was redistributed, and priority space was allocated for Danny's casket. The efficiency with which they solved the impossible cargo problem revealed just how easily it could have been addressed from the beginning. Michael watched through the terminal windows as ground crews prepared Danny's casket for loading onto the new flight. This time, the process was conducted with obvious care and attention, as if the airline staff had suddenly remembered they were handling the remains of an American hero. The media attention had clearly motivated a level of respect that should have been standard from the start. News crews had arrived at the terminal, transforming the departure gate into an impromptu press conference. Reporters interviewed passengers who had witnessed the confrontation, veterans who had come to show support, and family members of other fallen soldiers who shared similar experiences. The story was growing beyond just Michael and Danny's situation, to encompass broader issues of how airlines treat military personnel and their sacred duties. Senator Patricia Williams, who served on the Armed Services Committee, issued a statement that was read live on national television. What happened to Sergeant Torres and Private Martinez today represents a fundamental failure to understand the sacrifice made by our service members and the honor due to our fallen heroes. No military escort should ever be asked to abandon their duty for corporate convenience. The airline's stock continued to fall as the trading day progressed. Financial analysts were discussing the potential long-term impact of the public relations disaster on the company's bottom line. Competitors were quietly distancing themselves from the controversy while reviewing their own policies regarding military escorts to avoid similar situations. Michael's phone rang constantly with interview requests from news outlets across the country. He declined most of them, explaining that his focus remained on completing his mission to bring Danny home safely. However, he did agree to speak with a few military publications, hoping to ensure that other escorts would be better prepared for similar challenges. "This isn't about me," he told one reporter. "This is about honoring Private Martinez and making sure that other families don't have to watch their loved ones become the subject of a corporate policy debate. Every fallen soldier deserves to come home with dignity, and their escorts deserve the support they need to fulfill their duties." The new flight was scheduled to depart 3 hours later than originally planned. During the wait, Michael was approached by countless people wanting to express their support. Veterans shared their own stories of military service. Gold Star parents talked about their lost children. Flight attendants from other airlines stopped by to apologize on behalf of their industry. One conversation particularly moved Michael. An elderly woman named Betty Henderson approached him with tears in her eyes. "My grandson died in Iraq 5 years ago," she said quietly. "His escort was a young soldier just like you, and he never left my grandson's side. Because of soldiers. Like you, I knew my boy was coming home with honor. Thank you for not giving up." These interactions reminded Michael why his stand was about more than just following orders or fulfilling duties. It was about maintaining the sacred trust between soldiers and the families they serve. Every military escort carries the hopes, fears, and grief of families who have lost everything. Breaking that trust for corporate convenience was unthinkable. As boarding time approached, Richardson personally escorted Michael to the gate. The executive was clearly eager to ensure that no further problems arose, knowing that millions of Americans were watching to see how the airline would handle the resolution. Cameras followed their every move as they walked through the terminal. "Sergeant Torres," Richardson said as they reached the gate, I want you to know that this experience has been a learning opportunity for our entire organization. We will be implementing new policies to ensure that military escorts receive the priority and respect they deserve. Michael nodded but remained cautious. Mr. Richardson, I appreciate your words, but actions matter more than policies. The real test will be how your company treats the next military escort who needs your services. I hope they don't have to fight for the basic respect that should be automatic. The boarding process was handled with military precision. Michael was given priority boarding and escorted personally to his seat by the flight crew. The captain made a point of speaking with him personally, expressing his gratitude for Michael's service and his condolences for the loss of Private Martinez. Flight attendants ensured he had everything he needed for the journey. Before takeoff, the captain made an announcement to the entire plane. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honor today of carrying home a fallen American hero, Private First, Class Danny Martinez, who gave his life in service to our country. His escort, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, has shown us what dedication and loyalty truly mean. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor Private Martinez and all our fallen service members. The cabin fell completely silent. Passengers bowed, their heads in respect, and several could be seen wiping away tears. When the moment ended, spontaneous applause filled the plane, led by the veterans and military families aboard. Michael felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and recognition for Danny's sacrifice. As the plane lifted off from Dover, Michael looked out the window at the base where this journey had begun. He thought about all the other escorts who would follow this same route, carrying fallen heroes home to grieving families. He hoped that his stand would make their missions easier, that airline staff would remember this story and treat future escorts with the respect they deserved. The flight to Phoenix passed quietly. Michael used the time to prepare for the most difficult part of his mission, delivering Danny to his family. He reviewed the ceremony procedures, practiced the words he would say to Danny's parents, and tried to prepare himself emotionally for the moment when he would hand over the flag that had draped his friend's casket. News of their departure had reached Phoenix ahead of them. Local veterans organizations were planning to meet the flight, creating an honor guard to welcome Danny home. The Martinez family had been contacted by reporters asking for their reaction to the airline controversy, but they had chosen to focus on their son's homecoming rather than the difficulties that had complicated his journey. As the plane began its descent into Phoenix, Michael felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. He had successfully completed the transportation phase of his mission, ensuring that Danny came home with the honor he deserved. But he also knew that the hardest part was still ahead, saying goodbye to his best friend and helping a family begin the difficult process of grieving their loss. The controversy at Dover had made national headlines, but for Michael, it was just one challenge in a mission that had been difficult from the beginning. His focus remained on Danny and the promise he had made to bring his friend home safely. Everything else was just noise that threatened to distract from what really mattered, honoring a fallen hero and serving his family in their time of grief. The plane touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport to a scene that Michael had not expected. Despite the late hour, hundreds of people had gathered to welcome Danny home. Veterans from multiple wars, active-duty military personnel, and ordinary citizens who had followed the story stood in respectful formation along the terminal corridors. American flags lined the pathway from the gate to the baggage claim area where Danny's casket would be received. Michael was among the first to disembark, his dress uniform immaculate despite the long journey and emotional stress of the previous day. As he walked through the terminal, the crowd remained silent, their respect evident in every face. He could see Danny's family waiting near the ceremonial area, their grief mixed with pride as they prepared to welcome their son home. The airline had clearly learned from their earlier mistakes. The ground crew handling Danny's casket performed their duties with obvious reverence, moving slowly and deliberately as they transferred the flag-draped casket from the cargo hold to the waiting hearse. Richardson had personally flown to Phoenix to oversee the process, ensuring that no detail was overlooked in this final phase of the journey. Mrs. Martinez, Danny's mother, approached Michael with tears streaming down her face. She wrapped him in a fierce embrace, whispering, "Thank you for bringing my boy home. Thank you for not leaving him." Her words broke through the professional composure Michael had maintained throughout the ordeal, and he felt his own tears beginning to fall. "I promised you I would bring him home safely," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Danny was my brother, and brothers don't leave each other behind. Not ever." The simple words carried the weight of everything they had been through together, from their childhood in Phoenix through their deployment in Afghanistan to this final journey home. Mr. Martinez stood nearby, his military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. As a Vietnam veteran himself, he understood the significance of Michael's refusal to abandon his escort duty. He approached and placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "Son, what you did yesterday showed the whole country what military honor looks like. Danny would be proud of how you fought for him." The formal transfer ceremony was conducted with full military honors. Michael presented the folded flag to Danny's parents, delivering the traditional words, "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." The moment was captured by news cameras, but the media presence seemed secondary to the profound grief and respect that filled the ceremonial space. Sarah, Danny's girlfriend, had waited until the official ceremony was complete before approaching Michael. She carried the engagement ring Danny had planned to give her, still in its unopened box. "He talked about you constantly," she told Michael. "He said you were the kind of person who would always do the right thing, no matter how hard it was. Yesterday proved him right." The story of Michael's stand at Dover had continued to reverberate across the country during their flight. Social media was filled with messages of support from military families, veterans, and ordinary Americans who were inspired by his refusal to compromise his duty. The hashtag #HonorOurFallen had generated millions of posts, creating a national conversation about how America treats its fallen heroes. More importantly, the incident had prompted immediate changes within the airline industry. Multiple companies announced new policies specifically addressing the transport of fallen soldiers and their military escorts. Training programs were being developed to educate airline staff about the sacred nature of escort duties and the importance of accommodating military personnel without question. The airline at the center of the controversy faced ongoing scrutiny and financial consequences. Their stock price had dropped significantly, and customer satisfaction surveys showed a dramatic decline in public trust. Several major corporate clients had canceled contracts, citing concerns about the company's values and treatment of military personnel. The incident had become a business school case study in how quickly a single policy decision could destroy years of brand building. Richardson, who had remained in Phoenix to oversee the resolution, approached Michael after the ceremony. "Sergeant Torres, I want you to know that your actions have changed our company permanently. We've established a new department specifically dedicated to military transportation, staffed by veterans who understand the importance of these missions. No escort will ever face the situation you encountered." Michael appreciated the gesture, but he remained focused on the larger implications. "Mr. Richardson, this was never about your company specifically. This was about ensuring that every fallen soldier receives the respect they've earned and that every military escort can fulfill their duties without having to fight for basic decency. If your experience helps other companies understand that, then something good will come from Danny's story." The local veterans community had organized a motorcade to escort Danny from the airport to the funeral home. Hundreds of motorcycles and cars joined the procession, their headlights creating a river of light through the Phoenix streets. Citizens lined the route, holding flags and standing at attention as the hearse passed. It was a powerful demonstration of community support that provided some comfort to the Martinez family during their darkest hour. During the days leading up to Danny's funeral, Michael remained with the family, helping with arrangements and serving as a liaison with military officials. He shared stories about Danny's service, his sense of humor, and his dedication to his fellow soldiers. These conversations helped the family understand the man their son had become during his deployment and the respect he had earned from his brothers in arms. The funeral service drew attendees from across the country. Fellow soldiers from Danny's unit traveled from their current assignments to pay their respects. Gold Star families came to support the Martinez family through their grief. Veterans from multiple generations and conflicts stood together to honor a young man who had followed in their footsteps and paid the ultimate price. Michael delivered a eulogy that captured both Danny's character and the bond they had shared. Danny Martinez was more than a soldier, he told the packed church. He was a friend who could find laughter in the darkest moments, a son who made his family proud every day, and a man who believed in something bigger than himself. The fight to bring him home with dignity wasn't about airline policies or corporate decisions. It was about honoring the values Danny lived by and died for: loyalty, duty, and never leaving a fellow soldier behind. The incident at Dover had transformed from a personal mission into a national symbol of military values and civilian responsibility. Congressional hearings were scheduled to examine airline policies regarding military personnel. Veterans organizations used the story to advocate for stronger protections for military families and better support for those serving overseas. For Michael, the attention was both gratifying and overwhelming. He had never intended to become the face of military escort advocacy, but he recognized the platform it provided to educate civilians about military service and sacrifice. He began speaking at veterans events and military ceremonies, sharing Danny's story and emphasizing the importance of supporting fallen soldiers and their families. The Martinez family established a scholarship fund in Danny's name, providing educational opportunities for children of military families. The fund received donations from across the country, many accompanied by notes referencing the airport incident and Michael's stand for military honor. The scholarship became a positive legacy emerging from the tragedy of Danny's death and the controversy of his homecoming. Months later, Michael returned to active duty, but the experience had changed him profoundly. He carried with him not only the grief of losing his best friend, but also a deeper understanding of the responsibility that comes with wearing the uniform. He knew that millions of Americans were watching how military personnel conducted themselves, and he was determined to honor that trust. The airline eventually recovered from the immediate financial impact of the controversy, but the incident remained a defining moment in their corporate history. The new policies and training programs they implemented became industry standards, and their military transportation department became a model for other companies. The lessons learned from their mistakes helped ensure that future military escorts would face fewer obstacles in fulfilling their sacred duties. Danny's story became part of military escort training, teaching new soldiers about the importance of their mission and the support they could expect from their fellow service members. Michael's unwavering commitment to his friend became an example of the values that define military service: honor, loyalty, and the promise that no soldier stands alone, even in death. The controversy that began with a cargo weight issue at Dover Air Force Base had grown into something much larger, a reminder to all Americans about the cost of freedom and the debt owed to those who pay it. Danny Martinez came home with the honor he deserved, and his story ensured that future fallen heroes would receive the same respect, carried home by escorts who would never abandon their sacred duty.